Welcome back. Today I'll be going over Chapter 8 of Alanna Nash's book, Baby Let's Play House, Elvis Presley and the Woman Who Loved Him. Please take a moment to pause this video and just read the description before you continue. All right, Chapter 8 is titled An Earthquake in Progress. The year 1956 marked the turning point in Elvis Presley's life when personal and professional changes transformed him from a regional performer into a national phenomenon. Nash writes, quote, on January 8th, he celebrated his 21st birthday flying home to Memphis from a hayride appearance in Shreveport and then insuring his 1955 pink and black Cadillac Fleetwood. He was taking care of business and being responsible. No one could have known it, but he was precisely through the first half of his short life destined to die at 42. Although Elvis was legally an adult, he never fully matured emotionally in his relationships with women. His behavior evolved, going from silly pranks like throwing girls into pools to physical teasing, but he would remain an eternal boy. Nash details at length the Peter Pan syndrome, but for the sake of time, because this is already a really long chapter, I'm not going to go into it. But it's basically the same thing that she's been saying. He's a grown man with a little boy mentality who just wants to have fun and is stuck emotionally as a young man. On January 10th, 1956, Elvis went to RCA's temporary Nashville studio. It was a small facility built in partnership with the Methodist TV, Radio, and Film Commission before RCA had its own local studios. Elvis recorded his first tracks with Chet Atkins producing and was joined by familiar hayride musicians DJ Fontana and Floyd Kramer. One of the songs they recorded was Heartbreak Hotel, which was written by Mae Axton and her friend Tommy Durdant. By April of that year, the song would sell 1 million copies and would earn Elvis his first gold record. Nash writes, quote, the song found its genesis when Durdant, who followed the Ponies, picked up a copy of the Miami Herald. He looked at the horse racing entries and then scanned the rest of the paper. I just happened to catch a little small thing in there about a man who killed himself. I don't recall any names, but the only thing he left in the way of a suicide note was a sentence, I walk a lonely street. Chet Atkins remembers during the recording session that day that they were doing the song I Got a Woman or Money Honey when Elvis started jumping around and he split his pants right in the seat. I'll never forget them. They were pink with black piping on the sides. He asked somebody to go back to the motel and get him another pair, and he left his old ones lying around someplace. The next day, this girl who worked for the Methodist found them. She said, what am I supposed to do with these? I said, keep them. They'll be worth a lot of money one day. She thought that was very funny, but 6 months later, I heard she was trying to get on I've Got a Secret. Her secret was going to be that she got Elvis Presley's pants. On January 28, 1956, Elvis began his major television presence with his first of 6 appearances on Stage Show. A few days earlier, Elvis and Parker traveled to New York to meet RCA executives, including Publicity chief Ann Fulcino, who hoped he would become the label's breakout pop star. This was not Elvis's first time in New York. His early experiences there were awkward and unfamiliar. In 1955, he and Scotty and Bill were there to audition for Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts and were turned down. Elvis felt out of place among unfamiliar people, and he wasn't sure how to behave around those who spoke and joked differently from him. He had embarrassed Ann Fulcino by greeting her with a prank buzzer in his handshake. Fulcino said, my attitude was to make a total star out of Elvis, not a kid with a one-hit record, but a broad overall star. So I said to him, you know, that may be big in Nashville, but it will never go in New York. Don't ever do it again. Now, he was a smart kid, and if you caught him doing something that was dumb for the occasion, he absorbed it and he didn't repeat it. For example, I took him to Klub's, a German restaurant on 23rd Street, just a block across the street from where the RCA office was at the time. I ordered pork chops, and he started to pick his up with his hands. Then suddenly he noticed that I was eating mine with a fork, and he paid attention to where the forks were and what I did with them. This is where I give him great credit. He wanted to get somewhere and he knew he had to do certain things to get there. He was very intelligent, not the Harvard type intelligence, the instinctive intelligence. The rapid changes were overwhelming for Elvis, and at an RCA press reception, reporters treated him as a novelty, the flash in the pan with the funny clothes and suggestive stage moves. When he was asked about his reaction to his success, Elvis said, "It scares me. It just scares me." By spring 1956, Elvis remained anxious about his sudden fame and would express confusion and vulnerability in interviews, even as crowds screamed for him. "It makes me want to cry. How does all this happen to me?" Elvis told a reporter that fame happened so fast I could go out like a light, just like I came on. By then, the press was calling him the most talked about new personality in the last 10 years of recorded music. Nash writes, quote, "It was all snowballing now. The Colonel, putting pressure on Harry Kalkheim at the William Morris Agency in New York, got him booked on the Milton Berle Show for April. And after a Hollywood screen test at Paramount Studios in late March, producer Hal Wallace signed him to a contract for one motion picture with an option for 6 more, the money starting at $15,000 for the first film, up to $100,000 for the 7th. Elvis had no acting experience outside of playing Joseph in his church's plays when he was a kid in Tupelo. He was nervous for his auditions, of course. For one audition, he had 2 dramatic scenes from The Rainmaker, and he had only received his lines the night before. For a musical number, he lip-synced Blue Suede Shoes while playing a prop guitar. Elvis's screen test surprised everyone. The head of RCA's country and R&B divisions, Steve Scholes, and the label's promotional staff member, Chick Crumpacker, viewed it in New York. Crumpacker said, "We went back to the office and it was the talk of the place. Like, my God, this guy has all of that natural quality that these other actors have become famous for, because he has that same directness and ability to be himself on the screen. It looked like he wasn't acting at all. We were stunned." Alan Weiss was a screenwriter who would go on to write 5 Presley pictures, found Elvis's dramatic scenes to be amateurish, but once music was added, he said, "The transformation was incredible. Electricity bounced off the walls of the soundstage. It was like an earthquake in progress, only without the implicit threat." As Elvis's popularity surged, Parker paid Horace Logan $10,000 to buy out his hayride contract. This freed him from regular Saturday appearances, but Parker committed Elvis to a special hayride charity show in December. Parker told Logan that this was a good deal because by December, Elvis would be so big that they'd have to find a bigger venue to hold the charity special. Amid the whirlwind of fame, Elvis grew more optimistic after gaining support from film executive Joe Hazen, Hal Wallace's business partner, who believed strongly in Elvis's acting potential. News that thrilled Elvis, especially since he had hoped to act without having to sing in films. Elvis told Wallace, "My ambition has always been to become a motion picture actor, a good one, sir." In March, confident in his booming career and film prospects, Elvis bought a $40,000 ranch-style home for him and his parents. 1034 Audubon Drive was located in an upscale neighborhood near Memphis State University, and it was the first house the family owned since leaving Tupelo. Elvis was proud that he could do this for his parents. The house had 3 bedrooms, one of which he used to store all of his stuffed animals, many of them gifts from fans. Nash writes, quote, "For his primary bedroom, Gladys chose a remarkably girlish motif, decorating twin beds with pink taffeta dust ruffles and white quilted bedspreads with pink and blue flowers. From there, she hung pale yellow wallpaper flecked with blue and orange. White ceramic figures caught in mid-leap on black oval plaques dotted the walls, and installed a dark pink telephone that matched a selection of his pink stuffed animals. In truth, his room looked like something his fans would have wanted themselves, but Elvis seemed not to mind." In the spring of 1956, Elvis began dating Dixie Locke's friend, Barbara Hearn, a sophisticated and intelligent young woman who had dark hair and resembled Elizabeth Taylor. and she would soon be the first runner-up in the Miss Memphis contest. Like Elvis, she was an only child and sometimes found she and her mom were in a role reversal. After her parents divorced when she was young, she lived with her grandparents until she was 12. Barbara said, "My mom was sort of a party animal, and I worried about her a lot because I would mostly get in before she did." The first time Barbara saw Elvis perform was at Odd Fellows Hall. Her friend called her and asked if she wanted to go with her to see, quote, the new hillbilly singer. When Barbara asked what the singer's name was, her friend said Elvis. And Barbara asked, "What's an Elvis?" When she saw Elvis again, he was already dating Dixie. She and Dixie attended Southside High together and also worked alongside each other at Goldsmith's department store in the basement. They usually rode the bus together to work, but one day Dixie said her boyfriend was picking her up, and she'd ask him if he could pick up Barbara too. When the Lincoln pulled up, she was surprised to see it was Elvis. After that day, Barbara frequently rode home with Dixie and Elvis, and she even visited his parents with Dixie. This led to Barbara getting to know his family well before she truly got to know Elvis himself. Barbara called Minnie Mae a great old lady, and she even liked Vernon, who was standoffish and not as warm as Gladys, who she really liked as well too. Vernon even broke his protocol of being stingy, and he went out and bought a bag of burgers for everyone one day. Nash writes, quote, "As far as Barbara was concerned, the Presleys may have had very little, but they were a nice, hospitable family, and she felt comfortable in their modest home." Back then, Barbara was dating Ronald Smith. He was the musician who recommended Elvis go try out for the Eddie Bond band, the one where Elvis was told to go back to driving a truck. Fast forward to 1956, when Barbara saw Elvis again, a lot had changed. He was no longer seeing Dixie, and she was no longer with Ronald. At 19, she worked as an advertising copywriter for a local jewelry store and occasionally appeared in its live TV commercials because she was so photogenic. She was at WMC TV one night working when Elvis stopped in to see George Klein, who worked in radio out of the same building. Barbara remembers, "Elvis came to the window of the TV studio and poked his head in and watched what was going on. When I came out, the first thing he said was, 'How's Dixie?' I said, 'Well, I don't know. I haven't seen her since we got out of school.'" She thought it was really sweet that he would ask about Dixie, but he took Barbara's response to mean that she and Dixie no longer spoke and that she could date him. Barbara had a friend with her that night, so Elvis suggested that they all go to the variety club afterward. At the club, they sat and talked, and that's when Barbara realized Elvis was interested in her. He told her he was going on tour and he would call her during it, so she gave him her number. Barbara would be Elvis's first publicly acknowledged girlfriend. Barbara was drawn to Elvis in a grounded way. She liked his kissing and personality more than his fame or his looks, and was attracted to him because she appreciated unusual people. But she was surprised to see how insecure he was. The primping and his clothes were a result of his insecurity and not from being vain, in her opinion. When Elvis was in town, their dates consisted of going to the movies or grabbing a bite to eat or going to the record store. They'd also go to his house where they would sit at the organ and he'd sing to her. When he was away, Gladys would call Barbara and invite her over, and sometimes they'd sit at the organ. Barbara said, "She couldn't actually play, but she would touch the keys and it seemed to produce the most mournful sounds. A lot of people say she was funny and witty, but I never saw that side. She was interesting and amusing at times, but after Colonel Parker and the Fame came into play, I think she was more sad than anything, wishing she could awaken and find life as it was before, knowing it would never be, and just not wanting to accept the definite change." Gladys was not doing well. The Audubon Drive neighbors were giving her grief about the constant fans that congested their street, and they didn't like how she would hang her laundry to dry, saying, "This is not that kind of neighborhood." Poor Gladys. Nash writes, quote, "It all just made her nervous, like the trees she'd had cut down around the property in Tupelo. She started taking diet pills to help with her weight, and like so many in her family, she began to drink heavily, eating onions to disguise her breath." Gladys's older sister Lillian had a talk with her about it, but Barbara doesn't ever recall seeing Gladys even slightly impaired. Barbara said, She was always neat, clean, and meticulously dressed, even in a duster housecoat, and never appeared in hairpins or curlers. She carried herself as a woman who still felt she was the attractive girl she once was. The reality was Gladys was deeply fearful for Elvis's safety. She would do kind things like hand tissue paper to the girls that would knock on the door so that they could wipe the dust off of Elvis's car and keep it as mementos. But she would worry obsessively that their devotion or jealous men might seriously harm or even kill him. Young men who were embarrassed by their girlfriends charging the stage at Elvis would say rude things like they wanted to, quote, knock the shit out of this pretty boy, change his face. And this terrified Gladys. Barbara said, I would telephone her a couple of times during the evening to let her know that we were all right and that there was nobody threatening around. Nash writes, quote, Gladys worried so much that she kept herself in a perpetual state of gloom, and her health began to fail. She was often run down and her feet swelled from kidney trouble. Her eyes, dark shiners now, took on a frightened look. Overall, she was proud, anxious, and lost. Elvis got Gladys a lapdog named Sweet Pea after Popeye's son, thinking it would help, but she didn't really like animals and it failed to cheer her up. You know what it sounds like to me with Gladys? It sounds like a relationship where the girl is so in love or like obsessed with her boyfriend, and she doesn't want to lose him, so she obsesses to the point where she's just miserable all the time about him leaving her. Anyway, Barbara said, she was serious and concerned. She had to be. Goodness knows she was the captain of that little ship with all the responsibility that entailed. Vernon was of little help, still not playing a significant role in the house. And he was preoccupied with the idea of Elvis buying him a used car lot, Presley's used cars. But he did help Barbara respond to Elvis's fan mail, the ones that weren't routed to Kay Wheeler or Tom Parker's office anyway. Barbara said she wrote most letters and she and Vernon would sign Elvis's name. I wonder how many people still have these handwritten letters thinking that it was autographed by Elvis. Barbara, like Dixie before her, was becoming part of Elvis's family. Gladys even became friends with Barbara's mother, Pearl, and she and Vernon would go visit Pearl at her home. For a long time, Vernon would park the car on the street and Gladys would huff and puff her way up the long steps to Pearl's house. Then one day, Barbara's aunt came out and said, Mrs. Presley, why don't you just drive up to the back door? There are no steps back there. Nash writes, quote, just as Elvis had a way of making every girl feel as if she were the one, Barbara saw that Gladys did the same. Barbara said, I know she liked me and enjoyed my company. We would go for the proverbial Sunday afternoon drive when Elvis wasn't home, and we sat and talked together a lot. But I think she made all of the girls feel special. I understand why so many say that Mrs. Presley wanted Elvis to marry them. She wanted him to get married, and she wanted lots of grandchildren. So when Elvis gave Barbara a ring, she was not surprised, but she had mixed feelings about it. They were in Memphis having dinner with some people at Jim's Steakhouse. Barbara said, he just reached in his pocket and put this little ring box in front of me. My first thought was, oh no, he's going to ruin everything. Because I truly thought for a second that it was an engagement ring, and getting married at 19 was way down on my list. When I saw that it was a black onyx with a couple of diamonds around it, I was so happy. I did not want to get married. I wanted him to care for me, and I cared for him a great deal, but I would have been happy to have gone on as we were practically forever. Looking back, though, she realized they weren't a great match because they both came from a family of worriers. Gladys usually worried about Elvis. Vernon usually worried about money. Barbara said, we were having a meal at their house, and Mr. Presley was going through the bills. He picked one up and looked at it and said, $126. And then he named a jewelry store. He said, what in the world is this for, son? And Elvis said, oh, Daddy, don't spoil everything for me. It was my ring. Excuse me. It was my ring, $126. Just as Barbara was witness to Elvis's generosity, she was also witness to his jealous side. One night, after talking to Dewey Phillips, she and Elvis left the radio station to find a crowd of fans waiting for them. Elvis talked with them, as he always did, so Barbara stepped aside to get out of the way. A young man came up to her, and they began a conversation. She said, Elvis broke away from that crowd, came over, got me by the arm, and marched me like a naughty child down to his car. I thought, what in the world is happening here? I said, what's the matter? Are you angry with me? And he said, I don't want you standing around talking to men on the sidewalk. He went on and on and on, and I was just flabbergasted. Of course, Elvis could do whatever he wanted. She said, my husband tells everybody that Elvis and I dated steadily for a year. And I say, no, I dated him steadily for a year. He didn't date anybody steadily for more than 15 minutes. Nash writes, quote, Barbara never asked him about it, but she suspected that he divided women into good girls and road girls, the latter of whom were fair game and didn't mean anything to him beyond the moment. Barbara said, he was very, very respectful to women. If you could see how he treated me, my mother, his own mom, his grandmother, we were people he cared about. The ones who went backstage were in a different category. They were fans. On April 15th, 1956, Elvis performed at the Municipal Auditorium in San Antonio, Texas, and there to meet him was 17-year-old Kay Wheeler, president of his national fan club. She had helped the fan club grow to over 20,000 members. Members of the fan club would receive a large autographed photo of Elvis, a Presley pink membership card, and a 4-page monthly newsletter, the Presley Press. Kay was invited by Parker's office to attend Elvis's Texas tour kickoff in San Antonio and was personally authorized by Parker to go backstage. She took a Greyhound bus for the 270-mile ride to San Antonio, and she remembers, hell and high water wouldn't have stopped me. I looked out that Greyhound window thinking, oh my God, I'm going to see Elvis. Backstage, Tom Diskin pointed to an unmarked door and said, Elvis is in his dressing room, just go on in. She opened the door and found Elvis sitting in front of a mirror, smoothing his hair. Then he turned to look at her over his shoulder. She said, hi, Elvis, I'm Kay Wheeler, the president of your fan club. And looking surprised, he said, my fan club president? She said he had a mischievous grin on his face. He got up and walked over to her and, quote, put his hands on her shoulders and then began following the curves. Elvis said, is all this really you? That's an odd thing to ask. Kay remembers, he pretty much groped me. I didn't know what to think. My heart was beating 1,000 miles an hour. I was overwhelmed. He came on like Godzilla. She stepped back far enough for his hands to drop away, and they were both embarrassed. He said, well, and then he got quiet. She said, gee, but she was still enamored with him. Then a bunch of reporters came into the room and began asking Elvis questions, so she stepped out of the way. When asked if he planned to marry, Elvis said, why buy a cow when you can milk it through the fence? Nash says this comment would spark an outrage, even after the press toned it down to, why buy a cow when you can get milk under the fence? Nash writes, quote, suddenly, Elvis saw Kay standing in the corner and motioned for her to come over. Then before she knew what was happening, he grabbed her, turned her around, and pulled her toward him until her back was pressed up against him. He folded her into his arms and held her in a suggestive embrace, kissing the side of her face as photographers snapped away. Kay had no idea about Barbara Hearn or that those photos would end up on the cover of a national magazine. She says now, he should have been under freaking arrest. He's feeling me up in that one picture. Those are some of the most blatantly sensual poses that I've ever seen him in with a girl. Nash writes, Elvis kissed Kay passionately, quote, passionately, before going on stage. He performed 2 shows that night along with other artists, one of them being Wanda Jackson, who he had recently given his diamond ring to. Before the second show, Elvis invited Kay to his Fort Worth show, and she accepted. Then he introduced her to Scotty, Bill, and DJ. Scotty asked her if she was going to go into show business, and she said no, she couldn't sing, but she could dance. Nash writes, quote, Elvis had no idea that she was an accomplished dancer and that listening to Hank Ballard and Sexy Ways, she'd improvised on the current dance steps, melding together the white from rock and the black from bop for a routine uniquely her own. She was so good at it, in fact, that within 2 years she would earn a starring role in a Hollywood B picture, Rock Baby Rocket, doing the dance she called the rock and bop. That night when Elvis sang Money Honey, Kay danced her bop in the wings of the stage, and was lost in her own world. During the instrumental break of the song, she looked up and saw Elvis, Scotty, Bill, and even DJ watching her. When he was done, Elvis came off the stage and asked her, "Where did you learn how to do that?" After the show was over and they waited for the crowd outside to dissipate, Elvis played the house organ and sang Harbor Lights to Kay, and he also asked her more questions about the rock and bop. Kay says, "He asked me to show him the steps, and then Scotty picked up his guitar, and we did a little number together there, the three of us backstage. Up to that point, all he was doing was the hillbilly cat stuff, just shaking both of his legs and vibrating, not really doing any footwork. I taught him a few of the bop steps that the black people were doing back then and told him to go crazy with it." Kay was surprised to see that Elvis would later work it into his stage act. She said, "I don't know if he saw the bop somewhere else, but I do know that he incorporated some of the heel-toe moves after that, because I went back and looked at what he was doing before and after that time." Teaching him that and feeling she could give something back brought her joy and excitement, making the experience one of the happiest days of her life. Looking back, the moment was pivotal for Elvis too. The once awkward teen who couldn't dance picked up a signature dance move that would shape his early style, and fittingly, he learned it from a teenage girl. In late April, Elvis began a 2-week engagement in Las Vegas at the New Frontier Hotel. Parker considered Vegas his playground and had deep connections there, including ties to underworld figures. Parker's Vegas ties and fondness for gambling made the city an ideal, lucrative venue for Elvis, where he would be paid $7,500 a week in advance in cash. But Parker had overestimated Elvis's readiness for Las Vegas, where his immaturity showed, and the older, sophisticated audience there to see Freddie Martin was unreceptive. Nash writes, quote, "Elvis was scared stiff. Everything about the engagement was wrong. It was his first sit-down gig, and no matter what clothes he wore, even loafers and dress pants and a western-cut jacket, he seemed out of place." During the first night of Elvis's engagement, one of the guests, a friend of the co-owner of the Frontier, quote, jumped up from their ringside table and shouted, "God damn it, shit, what is all this yelling and screaming? I can't take this. Let's go to the tables and gamble." In 1959, Elvis said, "After that first night, I went outside and just walked around in the dark. It was awful. I wasn't getting across to the audience." At Parker's urgent request, the hotel added a special matinee on Saturdays specifically for teenagers. For $1, they'd get to see Elvis perform and also get a free soft drink. That afternoon, 13-year-old Nancy Hebenstreit was in attendance. Nancy lived in New Mexico, but she and her parents were in Vegas so that her parents could attend a golf tournament. 11 days prior, Elvis had played in Albuquerque, and Nancy, a student at Catholic school St. Vincent Academy, and her classmate Carla Singer waited outside the stage door for him. There was a swarm of other girls waiting too, but she was the first one Elvis kissed. Carla got a kiss too. The next day, though, their local paper published a front-page article that talked about Elvis kissing St. Vincent girls, and the nuns weren't too happy. Carla ended up getting expelled. Back to Vegas, Nancy was checking into the Desert Inn, which was across the street from the New Frontier, when she saw a friend who had a camera, so they went searching for Elvis. They found him immediately outside with Bill Black and Gene Smith, and she told him about the kiss he gave her, and he gave her another one. They also snapped a picture together. On another day, she ran into Elvis at the last Frontier Village Penny Arcade, where he was just passing time. They hung out and played games and took photo booth pictures together. Nancy had a very jealous boyfriend at the time who would end up burning all but one of the photos. Turns out Nancy would go on to become one of the first female Elvis impersonators. Elvis was in the New Frontier lobby one afternoon when he saw Judy Spreckles sitting at a desk writing a letter. He introduced himself to her, and they fell into conversation before he took her to the gift shop to show her a magazine. He said, "This says I'm a hillbilly. I'm not, am I?" She told him, "No, you're a singer." She said after that, "I was with him all the time. There wasn't a crowd then, just a few guys." Elvis and Judy formed a strong sister-brother relationship and were friends up until his death. She said, "Girls come and go, but sisters stay forever. He told me secrets that I never told and will never tell." I want to know secrets. Judy Spreckles, a 23-year-old divorcee from sugar magnate Adolph Spreckles II, offered to help Elvis as a secretary and companion. There was mutual attraction, but they restrained their relationship, knowing she was more experienced than he was. She said they were like kids going to amusement parks and anywhere else they could escape his fans. Judy said, "He loved the fact that I had a light blue Cadillac and he bought the same car for his mother in pink. One day we drove my car out into the desert and his cousin Jean came with us. Elvis drove that car as fast as it could go and I was in the front seat whooping and screaming and laughing. His cousin was on the floor in the back. He was so scared. But I'd been a stunt player in the movies and Elvis couldn't go fast enough to scare me." Elvis began to enjoy Las Vegas, especially watching other acts. And he especially enjoyed Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys' playful rendition of Hound Dog. He also enjoyed meeting fellow performers he related to, such as the highly emotional singer Johnny Ray and the flamboyant Liberace, Gladys' favorite, whose background and style fascinated him. Liberace also had a twin that did not survive. But Elvis loved the showgirls. Backstage one night, he noticed Gloria Paul, a voluptuous blonde, who was visiting another performer that was on the bill with Elvis. He overheard her and her friends talking about a TV show she developed that ended up getting canceled because it was too provocative. Elvis went up to her in her little slinky black dress and said, "Hi, ma'am, my name is Elvis," and then took her right hand and proceeded to suck each one of her fingers one by one. Gloria, who referred to herself as a love goddess, was surprised that this young kid would have the courage to do that. She said to him, "Where did you learn to shake hands like that? You don't provide towels by any chance, do you?" He said, "I'm from Tennessee, ma'am. That's how we do things there. No, I don't provide towels because other girls don't try to wipe it off." Turned off by his bold behavior, she said, "You're something else. You're a corny, horny little hick." During his Vegas engagement, Elvis met Joan Adams when he and Parker were at the Sahara Hotel. Parker knew the hotel owner. He also failed to charm Joan, a poised 18-year-old who was Miss Nevada, USA, and Miss Sahara. She didn't find him attractive and declined when he offered to take her out. Elvis's ego was crushed and he complained to Parker. Joan said, "He went back like a sick little puppy and told everybody at the hotel that I turned him down. He said, 'You're Miss Sahara and Miss Nevada, USA won't go out with me.'" An hour later, Parker showed up with the hotel owner, their entertainment director, and the publicity director. Joan said, "They weren't allowed to ask me to go out with anyone, not even sit with somebody. But Colonel Parker said, 'Why wouldn't you?' And I said, 'He's a nice man, but he's just not my type.'" Parker smiled insincerely and told her Elvis was a gentleman. And she told him she wasn't worried about that and that she could take care of herself. The publicity director, Herb McDonald, got on his knees and begged her to go out with Elvis just for the publicity, when she still said no because she didn't want to give Elvis any false hope. The owner of the Sahara, Milton Prell, begged her too. He told her, "Joni, we've done everything you've asked. We haven't made you sit with anybody or do anything you didn't want to do. Please go out with Elvis." Finally, she said yes as a favor, adding, okay, all of you, tell him to ask me again and I'll do it." They went on a date where Elvis talked about motorcycles because he had heard she found them sexy, and then took her for a ride on a motorcycle that he had rented. But she said, "We had a flat tire and ended up in a Cadillac." He drove them to Sunrise Mountain because he wanted to see the lights, a line she'd heard plenty of times before. And after a couple of failed attempts at getting her to sit closer to him, he asked her where she lived. When she told him she lived in a 8-foot by 40-foot trailer, he asked her to show it to him, and she said, "No way." Joan didn't allow anyone in her trailer, and she didn't allow anyone to get too close to her because she was underage. She had lied about being 21 years old because she wanted to work at the Sahara. Elvis kept insisting that she show him her trailer, so she relented, but the evening continued to go poorly for Elvis. She said, "He was sitting on my couch and kissing me, and then he started to do a little more than kissing. I told him, no, but he didn't take no for an answer. So I pushed him backward, and he fell off onto a square Formica table. When he fell, he hit the corner of the table before landing on the floor. He lay there moaning, 'I can't move.' She panicked, thinking he broke his back, And she asked him what she should do. Should she call Colonel Parker? He told her, "Don't do anything. Just let me lie here." She said the next day, Elvis and Parker showed up at the Sahara, quote, with every record that Elvis ever made. The colonel said they were from his private collection. In the following months, major magazines like Time and Newsweek featured Elvis's meteoric rise, firmly establishing him as a national sensation. As Elvis's fame grew, backlash intensified over his provocative performances, including public accusations of indecency and riots at shows. Nash writes, quote, "Then on June 5th, Elvis made his second appearance on the Milton Berle Show, singing Hound Dog and making the most of the beat that DJ had picked up drumming in strip clubs. It was the performance that would come to define him both as a cultural threat and as an innovative creative phenomenon." Gossip columnist Hedda Hopper wrote, "I applaud parents of teenagers who work to get the blood and horror gangster stories off TV. They should work harder against the new alleged singer Elvis Presley. I caught him on Milton Berle's show and was revolted. Dressed like a zoot suiter, he acted as though he had St. Vitus dance and indulged in bumps and grinds that wouldn't be permitted in the lowest burlesque houses." 2 days later, Harry Kalkheim at William Morris suggested to Parker that Elvis do less shaking. On the show that night was 22-year-old actress Deborah Paget, who was contracted with 20th Century Fox. She stood out to Elvis for 2 reasons. One, she was petite at 5'2", his type after Carolyn Bradshaw. And 2, there was talk that she would play the lead role in his upcoming film titled The Reno Brothers, which would begin filming that August. Producer Hal Wallace loaned Elvis out to 20th Century Fox as a test run on his acting and public reception after all the negative publicity. Elvis defended his controversial performance on the Berle Show by arguing that it was no more suggestive than Deborah Paget's, who appeared in a, quote, tight thing with feathers on the behind where they wiggle the most, and who bumped and pushed out all over the place. Paget was clearly on Elvis's mind, but so was Dixie, who was just about to graduate high school. At the end of May, Elvis stopped by her house and told her he was seeing Barbara Hearn. Dixie was fine with it since she had moved on too, and the next day, Elvis was in attendance at Ellis Auditorium to watch Dixie graduate. On June 11, 1956, Elvis left the road and flew home so he and his parents could attend a funeral. His cousin, Lee Edward Smith, had drowned. When they got home from the service, there was a crowd of girls around the house, but one stood out to him. It was Juanico, the girl he had met in Biloxi, and who was now 18 and more beautiful than ever. Turns out June's brother Jerry finally told her about the messages Elvis had been leaving for her, saying, "Oh, by the way, some guy with a hillbilly accent called you on the phone." But this was weeks after, so by the time she finally returned his calls, Elvis had moved on to a new number. She was sad, and despite her lingering feelings for him, she avoided following his career. Her friend Marie, who was a huge Elvis fan who attended many of his shows, invited June to go on a trip with a bunch of friends to Memphis. June declined, suggesting Florida instead, but since Marie had the car, they ended up in Memphis. They stopped at Lansky Brothers on Beale Street, and Marie finagled Elvis's address from one of the shop owners, who told her he was not allowed to disclose that information, but he considered it harmless because Elvis was out of town and the girls just wanted to, quote, ride by. And that's how June ended up in front of Elvis's home. Marie was upset that they had driven all the way to Memphis only to discover that Elvis was out of town, but June was secretly relieved. The girls arrived at Elvis's home and saw that there was construction going on for the pool in the backyard, and they wondered what shape it would be. June says, "I got out of the car and they all followed me, trespassing. I was standing on the fence looking over when a big black Cadillac drove up in the driveway. Out stepped Elvis and his mother and father, all dressed in dark clothing. I don't know if he put 2 and 2 together, like Marie is from Biloxi, so that's June standing at the fence. But I turned and had my back to him, and he came up behind me and took me by the waist and picked me up off the ground and said, 'What are you doing here?' She told him how they ended up there, and he told her he'd been looking all over for her, calling her and leaving messages, and why didn't she call back? They both laughed when she told him about her nitwit brother, and Elvis, looking over at Marie, told June, "Somebody told me you were engaged to be married." Then he brushed it off and told her she had to stay the week and his parents would love it. Elvis eagerly planned to show her Memphis and spend time together, movies, motorcycling, anything she wanted. And if she was still there when his car was ready, they'd fly to Houston to the factory and pick it up. He was just so happy she was there. Nash writes, quote, "There were also so many unspoken thoughts in his head. Now that he was getting a little notoriety, he thought more about his lost twin. He wondered what Jesse would think about all this crazy stuff. But now he had June, at least for a week, and he was going to make the most of it. They wore matching motorcycle caps with bright white bills, and when they walked down the street, people stopped them and asked, 'Are the two of you twins?' They just looked so much alike." Gladys was happy to have June there too, and the two would spend time in the mornings cooking and drinking coffee and talking while Elvis was still asleep. June said, "She saw me as domesticated and wise for my young years. Since my mother was divorced and working, I was the lady of the house. When I would get home from school, I would do the cooking, and I used to design and make all my clothes. The first time Mrs. Presley met me, she admired my skirt. I said, 'Well, thanks, I made that.' So she started taking it off of me, looking at the zipper. She said, 'You sew really well. You could do this for a living.' I said, 'I don't know. I never did think about it like that.'" June sensed that Gladys needed someone to confide in, and that Gladys was deeply uneasy about Tom Parker, the cigar-smoking shyster whose presence made her nervous. June thought Gladys seemed calm, but she also wondered about the pills Gladys would take that were on the kitchen windowsill. Gladys told June that she was afraid of waking up one day and it was just a dream and that she'd had nothing all her life. This was all too good to be true and everything was happening so fast. Then Gladys perked up a bit and said, "You've got to pick a name for me other than Mrs. Presley because you're going to be part of the family one day." June thought for a moment and decided on Lovey, a play on Gladys's middle name, and Gladys was thrilled about it. June said, "She thought I was a good catch for Elvis because I could do all these things and I was from Mississippi and I was crazy about her son. I was healthy looking too, so she thought I was perfect breeding stock, as we used to say. I was 5'6.5" about 128 pounds. She'd hug me and tell me I was pretty, and she would stroke my face. She was always telling me that Elvis needed someone to take care of him." Vernon drove Elvis and June to the airport so they could fly to Houston for the night to get Elvis's new car. Elvis booked her plane ticket under June Pritchard to protect her privacy. He had chosen Pritchard because it was from Pritchard, Alabama, that he had tried to call her shortly after they met. When they got to the hotel, he wanted to see her room first. There, she said they kissed and hugged a little, then he wanted them to go see his room, and he instructed her to bring her overnight bag. She hesitated, and he noticed it. He told her, "June, I'm not going to hurt you. I respect you and love you. I want you to stay with me. I promise I will not touch you. I just want to hold you." She said that's exactly what happened, too. They spent the night just spooning in bed before flying back to Memphis the next day. Wait a minute. They flew back home to Memphis. What about his car? Who drove it home? June says it was on their way home that she fell in love with Elvis. She said, "We'd spent so much time together, and I'd get lost in his eyes. He was just so very sincere. From then on, I knew I could trust him." That's it for Chapter 8. Stay tuned for Chapter 9, which is titled Love Times 3. See you then.